W1 plus W2 minus W, where W1, W2, W are already defined as mass flow rates. This is one mass balance. Similarly, the material balance of component A with the assumption that the blending is perfectly mixed, that is, there is no concentration gradient in the tank, and the composition of exit stream is same as the tank composition. So we obtained the rate of accumulation of component A as this ddt of B rho x. X is a mass fraction of A equal to W1x1 plus W2x2 minus Wx. So if we relate this to the corresponding steady state models, we saw that this is the corresponding steady state model where dV dt is 0 because it has attained a steady state equilibrium. Similarly, for mass fraction or accumulation of component A, these bars represent the steady state values. Since the steady state is achieved, we will get 0 on the left hand side. These are the steady state equations. These equations can be arrived by setting 0 to the left half of the dynamic equations that we have discussed in the last class. So, this dynamic model can be used to characterize the transient behavior of a variety of processes under a variety of conditions. See,
Sir, the recording is not on.
yeah, I am recording on section A today. Since I am getting both the sections, okay, I am recording on section A, I guess. So we'll get that. I will share it on the classroom. Okay. So, what are the different variety of conditions that you can think of? Suppose, if we consider the first situation, the exit composition, what will be the effect of exit composition on sudden increase in inlet flow rate, or due to gradual decrease in inlet composition? What is the effect? How do you study this? Or you can see what will be the effect of this transient phenomena on the volume of the liquid. If the volume is small or medium or quite large, how these effects can be seen? Will they be same or will they be different? These studies can be carried out based on the dynamic equations that we derive. But we all know that deriving the dynamic equations may not be always suitable. So what we intend to do now is to obtain a model that will be universal. So what we have to do? We have to see that we obtain that model in a more appropriate form for computer simulation. And for that, we have introduced a further additional assumption. What is the assumption? The density of the liquid. We have already assumed the density of the liquid rho to be constant. This is the additional assumption that we are incorporating now. This is quite reasonable because the density is often constant and it's very, very weakly dependent on the composition over the range that we are considering here. So for constant rho, the equations, there was d v rho dt. So this equation will come out to be W1 plus W2 minus W, and the accumulation of A component equation will be d of v rho x dt. So rho will come out. The first equation is self-explanatory. Since the volume can change, this expression will be giving you the transient behavior, the volume with respect to the flow rate. And this will give you the transient behavior of the composition of A. Now, this second equation can be expressed by following the chain rule as this. Now, this dV dt we have already seen to be equal to rho dV dt is equal to W1 plus W2 minus W. So you replace that. So this will be rho v dx dt, and this will be x into rho dV dt is W1 plus W2 minus W. So this is equal to W1 x1 plus W2 x2 minus Wx. So you can rearrange them to arrive at the final expression that this dV dt is equal to this. This is past expression that we obtained from this relation, and the next expression will be dx dt. That is this dx dt will be equal to. I think I have to escape this. dx dt will be equal to, from this, see, dx dt, you take rho v, divide both sides by rho v, the dx dt will be equal to w1 by rho v x1 minus x, w2 by rho v x2 minus x. So this is the dynamic equation that gives you the dynamic behavior of the volume and the dynamic behavior of the mass fraction of component A in the liquid, in the tank. Now, this derivation is based on the constant density assumption and the assumption of perfect mixing, right? But when this volume V is constant, now this V can be made constant in three different ways. Then what you can have, we can have W equal to W1 plus W2. That is inflow rate. This summation of inflow rates is equal to outflow rate. So this is true under these three situations. For if an overflow line is used in the tank, so any excess inlet flow will be overflowed. So the volume will remain constant. The tank is closed and it's filled to capacity. Then also there is no provision for volume to increase because it is filled to capacity. A third, if we apply a liquid level controller that keeps the volume essentially constant by adjusting either of the flow rates. So if that is the situation, that V is constant, this is a special case. If you go through either of the three conditions, then we can write this W equal to W1 plus W2. But this is not a generalized case. So this is a special case where volume is constant. Now what we would intend to obtain is a transfer function model. So for the simplicity, we assume that with liquid density rho, the volume is also constant. That's for the sake of simplicity. And further, the flow rates W1, W2, and W are constant. So what are the variables left? X1, there is a composition of A in stream 1, and X2, the composition of A in stream 2, and the other variable is X, the composition of A in outer stream. Therefore, under these assumptions, the component balance equation becomes rho v dx dt previously obtained equal to W1 x1 plus W2 x2 minus Wx. I think someone of you might have keep the mic on for this section. Somnath, please mute your mic. Somnath, mic টা mute করো. Okay. Under this condition, the component balance as of derived will be like this. See, V is constant, so it has come out of the differentiation. So rho V is constant now. So there are different situations. Suppose first case, if you consider that inlet concentration X1 is very, but X2 is constant. So therefore, we have to derive the transfer function model that will be between the exit composition X, that is the desired output, and the inlet composition X1 with X2 remaining constant. In the other case, maybe X2 varying, X1 constant, so it will be same. The different case will be when both X1 and X2 will vary. So in that case, you have to find out the transfer function between X and X1 and X and X2. So there will be basically two transfer functions. And we will see how to arrive at these two situations and obtain the transfer function model corresponding to these situations. First, the inlet concentration X1 is varying while X2 is remaining constant. Then the steady state version of the equation will be something like this. See, I put bar on X1 and X because X2 is constant. There's no need to signify its steady state or dynamic value. But X1 is varying and X is also varying correspondingly. So I put bar to indicate that at equilibrium or steady state, this is the value of X1. And if X2 remains constant, then the corresponding value of X will be X bar. Therefore, the nominal steady state value that you get Now, if you subtract this equation from the previous equation, what we'll get? We'll get an expression like this. This is 0. So rho v dx dt equal to w1 x1 bar minus wx bar. And w2 x2, since it is constant, if you look at the previous expression, is I'm subtracting from this equation this equation. So what I'm getting actually is rho v dx dt is equal to w1 x1 bar. What is this x1 dash prime? This is defined as x1 minus, this is very important, x1 bar x prime equal to x minus x. So this is called the perturbation variable or deviation variable. Why? This indicates the variation. This x1 is a variable, but this is constant. This is a nominal value at the equilibrium condition. If you perturb this x1 by this value x1 dash, what is the difference between the current value of x1 with respect to the nominal value, then the corresponding output variable will change to xt from this constant or nominal value of x bar. This variation is called x prime. So these are called the perturbation variables or deviation variables, right? With respect to the nominal steady state value following a deviation in either of the variables. Here we are changing x1 and obtaining the corresponding variation in x. So because x bar is now, see in this any expression, x bar is constant, the nominal value. So what you can write from here, from this expression, that dx dt is ddt of x minus x bar. Since x bar is constant, you can write this. But x minus x bar is x prime. So dx dt is equal to dx prime dt. So you put this over this. You put this relation dx dt equal to dx prime dt over this expression or equation number 3. So what you get? So this is the component balance equation in terms of the deviation variable. See, this is a uniform equation. X prime, x prime is a function. The variation of x prime is a function of x1 prime and x prime. So what we have to find out from this? We have to find out the expression for x prime, or you can say x prime t. Mind it, this is not the absolute value of x. This is the variation of x with respect to the nominal steady state value x bar. So this solution will give us the variation with respect to a variation x1 bar, which is the deviation of x1 with respect to the nominal value x1 bar. So without any loss of generality, we can consider that x0 is x bar. That is the initial value of the steady state is x bar, because it was normally at nominal steady state before we perturbed it. So what will be x till x prime 0? X prime 0 is x minus x0 or x bar minus x0. It is x bar minus x0. So that will be equal to 0. So obviously this is 0 initial condition with respect to the new variable, the deviation variable. Therefore, we take a Laplace transform. So what you will get from this expression? Trivial thing. So you rearrange this and obtain the transfer function. So x dash and x1 dash, the transfer function is given as this. See, this is a first order transfer function. But this is based on the deviation variable. That is, all the x primes and x1 primes represent the variation with respect to the nominal steady state value at which it was residing before the disturbance is given or the variation is applied. So this again can be represented in a more conforming form like this, gain and time constant form, where the gain is defined as W1 by W and the time constant is defined as rho V by W. So this is a composite form of this transfer function between x1 prime and x prime, or you can say x1 and x. Now, The next case, if both x1 and x2 are varying, the derivation will be analogous to the derivation in case 1, but the steady state version of this equation, this trivial equation, the accumulation of component A equation, can be written as this. Now you can see I have to put x1 bar, x2 bar, and x bar to indicate that both x1 and x2 is varying, and as a consequence, depending upon the variation, x is varying. And this x bar equation, this equation 11, indicates a nominal steady state value where this x1 is a constant, this x2 bar is a constant, and this x bar is a constant. That's the equilibrium state. Now, what we have to do? We have to change. Suppose you change x1 by an amount x1 prime. Then what will be the effect of that on x? X will deviate. This is the output variable, cause effect situation. X will deviate, x bar will deviate, x2 will deviate from x bar to x1 prime. To x prime, sorry. So there will be deviation. Similarly, if you change x2 by an amount x2 prime from x2 bar, then there will be another deviation of x from x bar to say x prime. So we have to formulate them, we have to model this cause effect situations. How? Now just subtract 11 from 1, just subtracting you get this. So all these deviation variables are there. And following the same analogy, take Laplace transform. So this xt can be simply written as dx prime dt. We've already seen that. So make that correction and take a Laplace. So this will be the Laplace transform. Rho v s x dash s minus x0. So both the equation can be rearranged in this form. Now, after rearranging, we get, see, something like this, where this transfer function indicates the variation of x with respect to x1, and this transfer function indicates the variation of x with respect to x2. Interestingly, if you see, this k2 is defined as this, and tau is obviously constant. Let me just get back to that. Interestingly, if you see, this is somewhat analogous to transfer function that we already obtained for right, and this is somehow similar with a different gain. This k2 is w2 by w, and k1 is w1 by w. So there will be certain relationship between these situations. Now, how that can be established? Let us see. This looks very familiar. So, in order to derive the transfer function between x and x1, what do we assume? We assumed x2 to be constant at nominal steady state value. So, we arrived at this transfer function. Okay, because your x2 t prime is 0, so x2 s prime is 0. Therefore, this equation, this term will become 0. So already this term will be there. So what we'll get this expression. Right? Next, the transfer function between x and x2 can be derived by taking x1 as constant, as x1 remains at x1 bar. So similarly, in that case, that x1 s, capital x1 s prime will be 0. So you'll get this. So this is nothing but the expressions for the variation of x prime with respect to x1 prime and x2 prime, while the other is kept constant. And if you relate this, this is nothing but a simple application of superposition theorem. Right? We're calculating the effect of one variation with respect to other being kept at constant. In both the cases, x1 and x2, then we can superimpose them. Since we assume the system to be a linear one, and these expressions are all linear operations. So this is how you can obtain the transfer function using the principle of superposition. Okay. Another thing is that you may always argue is that we're changing both x1 and x2 simultaneously, if then how can we assume one to be constant? No, we're not actually considering the or neglecting the effect of the second variable. While calculating the transfer function with respect to variation in x1, we're just not taking the effect of x2, because we know since this is a linear system, it will follow the principle of superposition. Just like if you have a parallel sources, you can ignore other sources and consider one source at a time. The similar things happening here. Okay, you are actually considering the effect of all the variations, but one at a time. But this principle will not hold if our linearizing assumption doesn't hold. So for the purpose of this portion, where you assume the operation to be linear, considering the perfect mixing, constant volume, and constant density, this principle of superposition is valid, and you can arrive at the transfer function. The simple superposition of two individual transfer functions, right? So this is the first part, that how the dynamic model can be derived and how it can be used to obtain the transfer function, and this can be used to study the dynamic behavior with respect to different conditions. Now we'll generalize this modeling. How general model principle, it is very important. I'll just reiterate the fact that a process model is nothing but mathematical abstraction of a real process. There's a mathematical representation of a real process. And there's a saying, adage, that the model equations are at best an approximation of the real process. You cannot represent any process by exact mathematical formulation. You always have to go for some approximation. And that is why it is said all models are wrong, but some are useful. It may seem a bit harsh, but if I rephrase this, that all models are not correct, but some are useful. But কোনো মডেলই fully correct নয়, but some of them are useful. How? How it can be explained? The model, because any model that cannot incorporate all the features, all the interactions, the coupling of actions at microscopic or macroscopic level of the real process, because it will become really rigorous and difficult to consider all the physical behavioral features of a model. So what do we do? We normally go for that model which is necessary for a particular study or analysis, and which is also sufficient. So the modeling inherently involves therefore a compromise. Compromise between what? The model accuracy and complexity. The model should be accurate enough but should not be too complex. So there is a trade-off between these two. And next is the cost and effort required to develop the model and verify it on the other hand. And cost and effort doesn't only mean economic cost, also the effort put up by the engineer to model, right? The required compromise should now consider the following factors. And these are the modeling objectives. What are the factors that we should consider while making this compromise? First, the expected benefit from the use of the model. Now, what are the benefits that you expect? If you expect the benefit to be not very, very important, then an approximate model with less accuracy and less complexity will be very well suited. But if you expect that if you increase the accuracy by a small amount, although it will increase the complexity, but the benefit will be manifold, then obviously you go for more accurate and complex models. So this compromise is always there. You have to make a trade-off between this choice. Now, another aspect is that the background of the user will be using this. If you are developing a model for a plant where a plant engineer will be operating based on the understanding of the model, then you may not go for a very deep level of modeling with all the intricate details. On the other hand, if you intend the model for the research purpose or for the R&D, then it is expected that you develop a model that should include the intrinsic details so that it can be made more accurate, or it can be made more close to the real problem. So these are the two aspects that should be maintained so that you always make a compromise between the accuracy and complexity, and obviously cost in the other hand. Therefore, it is said that process modeling is both an art and a science. A very interesting statement here. Let us see how it can be said. Because we know the creativity is required in modeling, where to make the simplifying assumptions that should result in an appropriate model. The appropriate model is very important. So, how this creativity can be used? The model should incorporate all the important dynamic behavior, but should not be too complex than necessary. It should be it should include all the important dynamic behaviors. It should not exclude any dynamic behavior, but it should be so represented that it is no more complex than what is necessary, because we do not want to indulge into this complex analysis. Therefore, less important phenomena may be omitted. That will make the number of model equations less, the model variables will be less, and the number of parameters will be at reasonable levels. So overall computational burden will be less. If you have this creativity, or you can master the art of modeling. But if you fail to obtain this, then what will happen? The failure to choose an appropriate set of these simplifying assumptions to start with will lead to either a rigorous but very complicated model, because you could not identify the important factors. What you have done, you have taken into account all the factors, be it important or very less important. That's why the model has become very complicated and rigorous. So that is a failure. And or if you have wrongly chosen the important dynamic behavior, so that you have missed out on many of the important dynamic behavior, so your model has become overly simplistic. So it is far away from the reality. So these two conditions or these two situations reside on the two extreme ends, where you have taken all the considerations, you have not ignored the unimportant or less important phenomena. And on the other hand, you have ignored most of the important dynamic behavior. That's why these are the two extreme ends. So what you have to judge, that this extremes should be avoided, and you should lie in optimum place in between them, right? So this is the art of modeling. Again, what is the science of modeling? The science of modeling is that the predictions of the process behavior can be compared, and this should be closely matching the actual behavior, both qualitatively and quantitatively. Right? So our intention here will be to the subject of theory behind the dynamic modeling, and will show how these models can be developed from the first principle, that is based on the conservation laws. So this is our objective here, to derive the theoretical dynamic model based on the first principle. So for that, we will develop a systematic method, procedure, and this are very self-explanatory, these steps. And then the most important thing is that we should go for a degree of freedom analysis, which is very important step in model development, especially for complex processes. We see why? Because any model will contain, especially a complex process, will contain a large number of variables and equations. So, whenever you develop a model, it is your duty to ensure whether the set of equations that you are deriving will lead to a existing solution. And again, the solution may be a unique one, or there may exist a number of solutions. This is the duty of the engineer who is modeling the system, to also ensure that the equations that you have derived are solvable. There may be different situations that is studied by the degree of freedom analysis. So let us skip to the systematic approach of developing the dynamic model. I'll just skip through it very quickly. So first you have to state the modeling objective and the end use of the model, who will be using that, for what purpose. Draw a schematic diagram, list all the assumptions, determine whether they are distributed variables or lump parameter, and therefore then you write down the appropriate conservation equations, mass, component, energy, then find out the equilibrium relations, and then perform the degree of freedom analysis. I've already shown the slides. So this is important. We have done up to point 6. Now we'll do perform the degree of freedom analysis. And then if possible, we'll simplify the model and we'll decide upon the variables, the disturbance variables and manipulated variables. So in this class, we'll discuss about point 7, 8, and 9. Up to 6, we've discussed. So first, let us see what are the conservation laws. Now, theoretical model, since we are discussing with chemical processes mainly, are based on conservation of laws such as conservation of mass and conservation of energy. What is the conservation of mass? Say, rate of mass accumulation is equal to rate of mass in minus rate of mass out. And conservation of component, say I, rate of component I accumulation is equal to rate of component IE in the inlet rate minus the out rate or the outlet rate of component I, but there will be another term that is rate of component I produced because we are dealing with chemical process. The process itself will produce that component I itself. So this is the conservation equation or the philosophy behind the conservation of component I. Right? Rate of component in minus rate of component out plus rate of component produced is equal to rate of component accumulation. Conservation of energy. Now, the general law of energy conservation is also called the first law of thermodynamics, if you can recall that. So, rate of energy accumulation is rate of energy in by convection, rate of energy out by convection, obviously, net rate of work performed on the system by the surroundings. There may be some work done on the system by the surroundings, plus net rate of heat addition to the system from the surroundings. Now, I have chosen this particular wording or phrasing because the examples that I will be considering next will be within the encompass of these situations. That is, rate of energy accumulation is the rate of energy in by convection of heat, rate of energy out by convection, plus net work performed on the system by the surroundings, external work done, plus the heat addition to the system from surroundings, right? So there will be two effects of the surroundings, that is a net work done on the system and the heat addition to the system. We'll see to it. We'll see to the situations by an example. So the conservation of energy, we can write the total energy of a thermodynamic system as a sum of internal energy, kinetic energy, and potential energy as this. Now for the process and example that you will be considering, it is easy to make these two assumptions that the change in potential and kinetic energy can be neglected as compared to the changes in internal energy because those changes will be very, very small. Because our intention is to find out the change in the internal energy. So we'll concentrate on internal energy only for the time being. Next, the net rate of work can be neglected because it is small compared to the rate of heat transfer and convection. We'll come to the situation, then you can understand this. So just remember that the net rate of work for the time being, we shall neglect. The net rate of work may be, suppose in a stirred tank, you have a stirrer. So there is some work done with the surroundings to stir the liquid. So that work done may be very, very less as compared to a heating process where there is a constant heating. So with respect to the constant heating, that work done by the stirrer can be neglected. So we'll take due consideration of these assumptions as we move on. Let us move on. Now we start our degrees of freedom analysis. So why this is necessary and how it is obtained? To obtain this, we simulate the process. By simulate what we mean, we must ensure that the model equations It may be integral differential equation. It may be a set of algebraic equation. They constitute a solvable set of relations. This is very important. If you have a set of equations but you cannot solve them, there is no need of having such equations. That model is as good as null and void. So, what we have to do, the output variables can be computed by the relations that you have given based on the input variables. That is a common philosophy. That given an output and input, we should be able to calculate the output from the information of input. For example, if you have a set of linear algebraic equation y obviously is a vector equal to a into x. A is a matrix, x is another vector. So this equation, a set of equation, will have a unique solution for x provided the vector x and y contain the same number of elements. That is, they contain n elements. N elements means there will be n number of independent equations or n number of equations in y and n number of unknown variables in x. Most importantly, the matrix A should be non-singular. If it is singular, we won't be able to find a solution. So, this is a very common example of the solvability of a set of equations. Let us move on. So, this is easy to arrive at by this logic for a simple equation like y equal to x. But for a complex system where there are number of equations is very, very large and they have a very complicated model, it is not that easy to make the similar evaluation. So we have to go for another mode of analysis, and that is called the degrees of freedom analysis. Let us see. For this, there's one general requirement. Okay, what is the requirement? If you recall that for a model or a set of equation to have a unique solution, the number of unknown variables must be equal to the number of independent model equations, right? This is the primary condition for an equation to have a set of equations to have a unique solution. This can be recast in the form that if all the available degrees of freedom are utilized in terms of degrees of freedom, then you can have a unique solution, right? So this is how the degrees of freedom concept can be indulged into the concept of solution of equations. How? See, the number of degrees of freedom, say NF, can be calculated from the expression NF equal to NV minus NE. What is NV? NV is the total number of process variables, and NE is the total number of independent equations. This is very important. These are the independent equations. So there may be different situations based on the number of NV and NE, the numbers NV and NE. What are the situations? So our degree of freedom analysis will be concentrated on this value NF. So there will be following categories. What is that? First, NF equal to 0. That is NV equal to NE. So the number of process variable is equal to number of independent equations. And we say the process model is exactly specified. You have exactly as many equations as the number of process variables you have considered. So if NF equal to 0, in this case, the number of equations equal to the number of process variable, and the set of equations will have a solution. And if not, it will be a unique solution. But there are certain cases where even if under this condition there may be a non-unique solution. But you can assure that it will have a solution at least. And in normal usual situations, it has a unique solution. There is a measure of consistency, whether these equations are consistent or not. I'll not indulge into that. See, it will be solvable. Other situation, if NF is greater than 0, that is number of variable is more than the number of equations. NV greater than NE. Then we say the process is underspecified. That is, you do not have enough equation to specify all the variables. So what will happen? This NV minus NE or NF number of variables you cannot solve from the equations. What you have, you only can solve for any equations to obtain NE number of variables. So What about the rest NF process variables? You cannot specify them. So at the end of the day, what you will have? We have infinite number of solutions to such set of equations if NF is greater than 0. That is why you say the process is underspecified. And there will be infinite number of solutions because number of variables is more than number of equations. And the third case is NF less than 0. And we say the process model is overspecified. What does that mean? Number of variables is less than the number of equations. So what will happen? The fewer process variable and there will be more equations. So you will not be able to achieve a solution that all the equations will satisfy. So under this condition, you will not get any solution to the set of equations, right? So this will be the worst case, right? NF greater than 0 is again not advisable because you have infinite number of solutions. So the most suitable solution or situation will be NF equal to 0. It's always satisfactory case. But if NF is greater than 0, then what you can do, you can have sufficient number of input variables. There is sufficient number of variables for which you do not cannot assign a numerical value because that is not solvable. The enough number of variables will not be solvable. So what you can do, you can write down additional independent model equations based on these variables. They may be input variable like disturbance variable or manipulated variable. If you define them to be disturbance variable or manipulated variable and express this NF number of variables by their independent relationships, then you'll get additional model equations such that at the end of the day, NF will again become 0 because you have arrived at additional equations so that the number of variables is now equal to number of equations. Okay, so we'll see how a structured approach of modeling can be done based on this degree of freedom analysis, and at the end of the day, we can achieve a unique solution to any given problem by this approach. So we'll see. So first, what are the steps that you have to follow? So you have to list all the quantities that are known or constant and can be specified. And on the basis of how this can be specified on the basis of equipment, dimensions, known physical properties, so on. So you list all the quantities that are constant and can be specified. Then determine the number of equations and number of process variables. And you should maintain keep in mind that time you cannot